One winter night, some 40 years ago, a most unruly and spectacular celebration was transpiring in a room at a hotel in downtown Toronto. So wild and unruly was the party I speak of that unexpected visitors arrived at the door in a manner, well, unexpected. The thing was that my dear friend and colleague, Billy Boy Cutthroat, we shall call him, for the purpose of concealing his true identity, had been fueling the event with a liberal supply of some magical tobacco. And true to the nature of this trance-inducing substance, the party was rocking and rolling and raging and reeling when a rap on the door made talk stop and tension strike. "Police!" shouted a reveller. Unfortunately for my dear friend and colleague Billy Boy Cutthroat, he was forced by circumstance to engage in an act that transformed him into a myth, if not instantly, then over the course of the next 3 years. What did he do? The drug was so incendiary, so unsafe to have on one's person, that he rushed to the window, pried it open with his usual panache, and jumped to his death. At least that is what most eyewitnesses were under the impression he had just done. Killed himself, for he was never seen again. Or so went the gossip from one end of the land to the other. To add fuel to the fire, as is the way in our culture, the story was embellished to include the fact that our hero had jumped from a floor unheard of in the annals of history indigenous. It was the 30th floor, so of course he died. In Cree, there are 3 words for the idea of narrative. The first, Achimawin, means to tell a story, that is, to tell the truth. The second, Kidaskuin, means to tell a lie, that is, to weave a web of fiction. And at a point exactly halfway between these 2 polar opposites stands Atsudogiwin, which means to mythologize, that is, to weave a web of magic. As I wandered across Ontario over the next 3 years, I traced this story from city to reserve to town and back to city, believing all along that Billy Boy Cutthroat had plunged to his death, that Billy Boy Cutthroat's spirit, one known for its strength, its lust, its indomitability, clung to a window ledge outside that window for hours, while the law enforcers turned the room inside out looking for evidence of criminal activity of the sort for which Billy Boy Cutthroat had gained through the years such glamorous notoriety. Over time, the 30th floor in that hotel room became the 25th, then the 20th, then the 15th, then the 10th, and so on, until some 3 years later, I finally ran into Mr. Cutthroat himself, live and in the flesh and in full control of his faculties, in his home community of northwestern Ontario, some 600 kilometers north of the fabled city of Thunder Bay on Great Lakes Superior's tempestuous shores. By the time I got to the source of the myth that had electrified my imagination every time I thought of it, as it did for so many others, it turned out that the downtown Toronto hotel room had not been on the 30th, nor the 20th, nor the 10th, nor the 7th, nor even the 3rd floor. It had been on the 2nd. And Billy Boy Cutthroat hadn't hung on to that window ledge for hours. He had merely dropped to the ground, suffered a few minor scrapes, one sore ankle, then hobbled off down the alleyway, around the corner, and down the street to the nearest bar. That was the truth. That was the non-fiction. That was Achimawin. That the floor was the 30th was a lie. That was the fiction. That was outright Kidaskuin. At a point exactly halfway between these 2 conflicting narratives, or the 2 versions of the same story, That is, a point exactly halfway between the truth and the lie sits the narrative I heard from perhaps the 10th teller of the tale, a good 3 years before I caught up with my friend up north. And that's how my dear Wichiwagan, which means friend in Cree, Billy Boy Cutthroat, from the wilds of northwestern Ontario, got transformed from a man, which is the truth, to a god, which is the lie. But in the end was and still is both, the myth. Thus does he hover in the place where live such beings, that is, in the world of magic, in mythology.